Hello, everyone. Today is August 6th, 2023. We're having a Israeli-Palestinian simulation with Professor Daphna Golan. We are the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We are proposing the creation of a democratic government for the people of Israel and Palestine, from the river to the sea, that would include Israel, West Bank, Gaza, 14 million people, based on true democratic principles, based on a common parliament with Palestinians and Israelis in the parliament as equal, who will decide issues that are relevant to Israel and Palestine, who will have their own narrative, not Israeli or Palestinian, but common to the Israeli and the Palestinian government. We are proposing a constitution upon which the common government will act and govern the whole area of Israel-Palestine. We do not believe that, or at least I do not believe that the Israeli or the Palestinian governments are legitimate. They control the area of many areas in Israel-Palestine, but they are not elected by the people who they control, and therefore they are not legitimate. My name is Joseph Avasar. My email is josephavassar@gmail.com. Our website is ipconfederation.org. It has a constitution, questions and answers. And if you go to the constitution, you will see how this common government will be created, how it will function alongside the Palestinians and the Israeli governments. We do not propose the dismantling of those separate governments. We propose the creation of a secular common government for the whole area that will be really the only legitimate government that will work side by side, the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. Today we have a simulation with Professor Daphna Golan Agnon. Professor Daphna Golan Agnon teaches human rights at the Faculty of Law of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She is a co-founder of B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, and the Israeli-Palestinian Women Joint Venture for Peace, the Jerusalem Link. Her recent book, Teaching Palestine on an Israeli University Campus, Unsettling Denial, tells the story of the denial of the occupation and the Nakba. She has been an activist with the Save Lifta coalition, which consists of activists from various backgrounds, including Palestinians, Israelis, and individuals of other nationalities and faiths. Next, we will have attorney Walid Abu Tayyeh on August 20th. He is a candidate for mayor for Jerusalem. He wants to unite the city of Jerusalem, and he wants to be the first Palestinian mayor of Jerusalem. On September 17, we will have Hussein Ibish. He is a senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf State Institute in Washington, D.C. We will then have on October 1st, Alon Burstein. He is a visiting assistant professor and a fellow in the Department of Political Science at the University of California, Irvine. On November 1st, we will have, we will be hanging a giant billboard in Tel Aviv, which states a Jewish state is bad for Jews. And it will stay there for 30 days. This is a list of people who graciously agreed to come in and participate in the simulation. As you can see, the list is very long. We had Noam Chomsky come in twice and for the simulation, and he recorded a video endorsing our formula for peace. But we had other people also endorsing our formula for peace, and we have videos on YouTube showing their endorsement. These are the people who unfortunately have not responded or refused to come. As you can see, we're trying to pull them in. It's not easy because many Palestinians and many Israelis, while they are opposed each other, they don't really have in my opinion, a vision for peace. They have a vision for opposition to each other, but not a vision for peace. And but we're trying to get them in to have to show them our simulation and our formula for peace. The simulation will take approximately 120 minutes in several segments, followed by 5 minutes discussion with our guest, Professor Daphna Golan Agnon. And then we'll have a conversation with the professor and question and answers with the professor and closing remarks for 5 minutes. We have a short video that explains our vision for peace, and I'm going to play it. It's only 2 minutes, but I think it explains our vision for peace very well.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations, and instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we will be simulating what was shown in the video. I'd like to take a pre-simulation survey and ask all of you to vote at this time. Do you support a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine? Vote either yes or no, and we will conduct the same survey after we are done with the simulation. Okay, I know we have a lot more people than what I see on the survey. Could you all vote so we have as accurate polling as possible? We have 23 people voted, and I see 35 participants. So if you can all vote, don't be embarrassed. It's not going to bite you. It's not. We don't really know who vote, so don't be embarrassed to vote. Please, let's try to have as many as possible. Right now we have 26 people voting, and I know we have 35 people participants. So that means that 9 people have not voted. Maybe you're on the phone, or maybe you're undecided. That's fine. So right now we have 25 out of 26 voting yes, and that's 96% voting yes, and 1 out of 26 voted no, and that's 4%. Okay, so let's end the polling, publish the results. So that Professor Golan was, this is Daphna Golan Agnon. This is her first time, so that you know, we usually get a very, very high acceptance of the common government, because many of the people that are in here already participated, and they understand what the common government is and how it functions. So that's why we have such a high acceptance of a common government. We are here to simulate how the common government will work and how it will make peace. We are not anti-Israel or anti-Palestinian. Professor Daphna Golan Agnon is not a speaker. She's not our speaker. She's invited to stress test our formula. We follow our own narrative. We believe that the common government will also follow its own narrative. It's not a Palestinian government. It's not an Israeli government. It's a government for the whole area, Israel, Palestine. We expect to have a very rigorous discussion today, but hopefully it will be a respectful conversation. We do not preclude other formulas for peace. We encourage other formulas for peace. We invite people with other formulas for peace, and we are not claiming exclusivity. We are asking you to judge our criteria not based on perfection. And we also ask Professor Daphna Golan Agnon to be fair. We are not enslaved to perfection. You know, someone said, well, why are you putting this picture of a slave tied? It's in order to demonstrate that we are not enslaved to the idea of perfection. Perfection is the enemy of good, and we are asking Professor Golan Agnon to judge us based on, not based on perfection, but based on the alternative. What is the alternative? Not what's based and not what's perfect. We're asking you to judge us based on, is the formula that we are proposing implementable? Could it bring peace? Does it have any downside to the Israeli or the Palestinian side? And if so, what is the downside? We have many proposed legislation to demonstrate. We are only demonstrating how the common government could work and how it could create legislation that both sides, the Palestinians and the Israelis, will have to accept, otherwise they will lose legitimacy. We cannot show you all the legislation because that will take hours and hours, but what we are showing you today is the tip of the iceberg. We ask you to look at the big pictures, avoid technical arguments, and refrain from comments. This is a simulation. This is not a discussion. It's a simulation in which the professor is asked to respond and make comments, but the audience are encouraged to ask questions, but keep your comments to the end. So what's a simulation is a model that mimics the operation of an existing or proposed system. That's what we are doing today. And that's what we hope that you will help us with. So if I show you a picture of an airplane and you say, Joseph, how does this plane fly? That's a question. That's perfectly okay. It's encouraged in the simulation. However, if you say airplanes are bad, they cause pollution, they crash, all of these are comments. Please ask questions, but refrain from comments because comments take the discussion into somewhere else. We want to demonstrate to all of you how the common government could work, and we want to demonstrate to the professor. At the end, you can have your comments during the discussion period, or you can put your comments in the chat. In order to do this assumption, to do this simulation, we have to have assumptions. And these are the assumptions that we need in order for us to assume that, in order to have a good simulation. So you need to assume, all of us will need to assume that we just finished 3 months of election. In other words, today is August 6th, 2023. You have to assume that we had 3 months of election and the election took place online, meaning on the internet. That we gave 14 million people in Israel, Palestine, which is from the river to the sea, that includes Gaza, the West Bank, Israel, and Jerusalem. With the exclusion of minors, 14 million people are permitted to vote. They were permitted to vote for the last 3 months. You have to assume that 5 million people voted, that 3 million Palestinians voted, and 2 million Israelis voted. You'll have to assume that a president was elected. For purposes of this simulation, I don't intend to be ever president of this because I am not even qualified, but you'll have to assume that 1.5 million people voted for me, Joseph, to be president, and 1.3 million voted for a Palestinian lady, and we will rotate in 2 years. I will become vice president, she will become president. You also have to assume that 300 parliament members were elected from 300 districts in Israel and Palestine. You'll also have to assume that each parliament member represents 47,000 people, because if you divide 14 million by 300, you'll get 47,000 people. Professor Golan Agnon, do you have any questions or comments regarding these assumptions?
No, I'm following you. I'm with you. Thank you.
I'm sorry?
No, I support your assumptions. I'm with you.
Okay.
I'll keep my comments later.
Okay. What are your comments regarding those assumptions? Are you saying they're realistic?
No, I don't say I have comments. I'm saying I agree with everything.
Okay. So you accept the idea that those assumptions could become a reality, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I agree. I believe that, by the way, does anyone else have any questions, not comments, about those assumptions?
Hi, Joseph. It's Don Raphael. I'm speaking from San Francisco. My question is, it's hard to imagine a third common government over two other governments. We, at least in the United States, look at things through a lens, good or bad, of one governmental entity. So how do you suppose this common government to be legitimate, particularly when the existing governments can veto many of the policies implemented?
Well, it's not over the Palestinian or the Israeli government. It's really below, because the existing governments will have a veto power. This online election will be conducted regardless of whether or not the Palestinian or the Israeli governments authorize it, agree with it, or accept it. And it will be the only legitimate government, because there is no legitimate government in Israel, Palestine right now, and it will be elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. So it will be a parallel system, regardless of the wishes of the Palestinian or Israeli government. Any other questions?
Yes, I had one.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, this is Jay Johnson in Santa Monica. Regarding the election where you said everyone is available to vote, but I'm curious about the Hasidic Mizrahi community. Have you given any thought to whether they will participate in the vote? And are they able to vote, being that it is a computer system that they may or may not participate in? We're just making a basic assumption everybody votes without whether the conservative, reactionary, right-wing folks will not participate.
Okay, so the voting will be available online. You can vote using your phone, using your computer, going to the library, using a friend's phone or a friend's computer. I don't believe that that there is a identifiable segments in the Palestinian or Israeli society which is known not to use or are precluded from using a computer or a phone. There may be some few people, but they can, if they are interested in finding a way to vote, that's why we are allowing 3 months. And if they are, and so they should have time within 3 months to vote.
Well, I'm getting to the idea of the boycott of the election by the conservative Hasidics and Mizrahi's Hamas, for that matter. They will be boycotting. Have we given thought to that?
Well, if they boycott it, then that's totally within their right to boycott. You can boycott election in every election everywhere in the world. We are not forcing people to vote. This is an option to vote. It's not required that you vote. We're just giving you the option to vote, and it's up to you whether or not you choose to vote or boycott. That's the same in any democracy around the world. Any other questions?
Yes,
Can I ask a question?
have a
Oh, sorry.
question.
Sorry.
Olivia.
Yes, sorry, there was a gentleman before me. I beg your pardon.
Okay.
Joseph, in order to evaluate the acceptance or popularity in Israel, Palestine of the IPC, have you ever thought of doing polls, opinion polls, professional polls?
Olivia, please restrict your question to the slide that is in front of us. But to answer your question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. I'm sorry.
Okay, no government, no democratic government ever conducts a poll before it does the election. When Israel conducted its first election, I believe it was in February of 1949, it did not conduct a poll. It didn't even conduct a poll whether they want a Jewish government or not.
That's true. That's true. It's
so
not the
you
government,
just
it's
do the election and people vote. You don't need to create obstacles to voting.
Yeah, sure. It's usually the media that does polls. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Joe.
Any other questions?
Yes, I had a question.
Yeah, hi.
So if I heard you right, you said that the elections would go ahead whether or not the Israeli or Palestinian governments approve of them. They don't need their approval. And if that's the case, it seems to me that means that the Confederation goes ahead whether or not it's accepted or approved by the two existing governments. And in that case, I'm wondering, why are you calling it a government rather than calling it a gigantic nonprofit?
Because it will be elected by the people. It's going to have a parliament. It's going to have a parliament. It's going to have a president and vice president. It's going to have a judicial system. it's going to be the only legitimate government in Israel, Palestine. It's not a nonprofit organization. It will have judicial, it will have jurisdiction to enforce its legislation, including whatever way of enforcement, including if they choose to have a police force or whatever. So it's not a gigantic nonprofit. It is literally a government.
Well, what I don't understand is, I mean, all of these different functions like parliament, judicial, and so on, of course, you know, big organizations can have these kind of things. But when you talk about it having, being a government, that indicates some kind of actual authority over to make laws. And if you don't have the initial buy-in of both the Israeli government and the Palestinian government, how does this get off the ground? I mean, in other words, you say it'll become a law unless they veto it. Let's say they just ignore it, and you say it's a law. How are you going to enforce that against the government?
It's not enforcing it against the government. It's enforcing it with the people of Israel and Palestine.
How can you enforce anything if the government doesn't allow you to do it?
Well,
it means some sort of penalty if you don't obey.
It's the same way that you enforce decisions by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court doesn't have any enforcement mechanism.
No, but
Supreme Court has is the power given to it by its ability to embarrass the government. The same thing the common government will have. If we have sufficient number of voters, then we will have the legitimacy, and we will be able to demand that the Israeli and the Palestinian governments will not put in obstacles, because if they put in obstacles, they will lose legitimacy. So it's a competing process.
Well, that's a hopeful scenario and great if you can achieve it. But what I'm saying is that even achieving that scenario would mean ultimately, through the numbers that you have, getting the existing governments to accept the idea that you can make decisions and enforce them. But unless they accept that you can enforce it, since you don't have any executive powers, you don't have anything equivalent to what the Supreme Court can rely on or command, you don't have any way of enforcing your decision.
Look, I don't want to argue with you. This is what we are doing in the simulation, and I think you will see how it's done.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right. I believe that the creation of this common government could be made with a relative minor expense of $100 million. $100 million is what a full-fledged war between Gaza and Israel, 1 day of full-fledged war between Gaza and Israel is over $100 million. With the equivalency of 1 day of war, we can create this common government, and I believe it will be it could be implemented with that kind of money. So now we are asking for your participation. We are asking for people to act as, and that we're getting into the process that the person, I forgot his name, was asking before. So we're asking for people to act as volunteers. Right now, we need a volunteer to be a Prime Minister of Israel. Do I have a volunteer for Prime Minister of Israel? To act as Prime Minister of Israel, you'll have to assume his personality, which is right now it's Benjamin Netanyahu. Do I have a volunteer for Prime Minister of Israel? Please. I need a volunteer.
If no one else wants to do it, I will do it.
Okay, Charles. Do I have a PA, a volunteer to be a PA president?
I could do that, Joseph.
Okay, Nasir. And I need a Hamas leader. Do I have a volunteer to be a Hamas leader? It's always difficult to get a Hamas leader. You are not really a Hamas leader. You're only acting as Hamas leader in this simulation. So don't be hesitant.
Sean, don't be shy.
Shlomo, okay.
No, Sean Zahar.
Oh, okay. So who is volunteering? I need a Hamas leader.
I said I would do it, Libby.
Okay. But you need to be a Hamas leader, not a Libby.
I will. I'll do it.
Okay. Is Sean, are you willing to be a Hamas leader? You see Sean raised his hand. Sean?
Okay. If he wants to do it, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sean.
I could,
All right.
Yeah.
All right, good. Thanks, Sean.
Okay.
It's actually easier
Okay,
to
the
be
rest of
Hamas.
you will be parliament members, okay? And you'll have to decide at this time, are you Israeli or Palestinian parliament member? You'll have to decide, are you from an Israeli district or a Palestinian district or a mixed district? So I'm showing you a map and you'll have to decide what district do you represent? Are you representing area in Gaza, the West Bank, in Israel? These are either exclusively Israeli or exclusively Palestinian, or many, many districts are mixed district. And I may ask you during the simulation, when you vote, what is your district and what is the makeup of your district? So let's have, just to identify ourselves, let's have first Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Say, so we know how many Palestinian parliament members we have, please say yes. Okay, need more Palestinians? Okay, so we have 8 or 9, 10, okay, 11. Okay, so we have, end the polling, we have 11 Palestinian. And let's have the Israelis, please vote. So we know how many Israelis we have. Okay. All right, so we have 6 Israelis and 11 Palestinians. All right. So now that we have a parliament, we have a president, and we have the election, we need to ratify the Constitution. Libby, would you be so kind as to read the Constitution? Read it out.
All right. We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch related to the IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
So we do not intend to abrogate. We are constitutionally prohibited from abrogating or undermining any agreements between the Israeli and the Palestinian government. They can agree to whatever they want, including two-state, one-state borders, whatever they want. Constitutionally, we are prohibited from interfering or abrogating or undermining those agreements. We also constitutionally agree to give the Israeli and the Palestinian government veto power over legislation that affects their sovereignty. So if it affects their sovereignty, they have a veto power. Does anyone have any questions regarding the Constitution? Does Professor Daphna Golan Agnon, do you have any questions or comments regarding this Constitution?
No,
Okay.
sounds good.
I'm sorry?
I'm saying the Constitution sounds good.
Okay.
I'm with you.
Does anyone have any questions regarding this Constitution? Questions, not comments, questions. Okay, having heard no questions, we are going to vote to ratify this Constitution. Parliament members, Palestinian parliament members, please vote to ratify the Constitution. By the way, if you do not ratify this Constitution, you will be expelled from the parliament, because in every democracy, including ours, parliament members must accept the Constitution. Okay? Okay, so the person who voted no is expelled from the parliament. You are not allowed to vote because you do not accept the Constitution. In order to be in the parliament, you have to accept the Constitution. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Okay. We need one more Israeli, yes. And the polling, 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of the Constitution. Therefore, this Constitution has passed and has been adopted. And this is a moment to celebrate for the whole world, because it's the first time in history that the people of Israel and Palestine have passed the Constitution for a common parliament. Now we're going to the first legislation issue. Since we got no objection from the professor, I'm not going to go over the reasons why she is wrong. She accepted this, so therefore we are going forward. By the way, we did have a full-page ad in the New York Times, which announced the election on December 12, 2012. And the Israeli and the Palestinian governments did not object and did not create any obstacles for the election. Let's go to the first order of business, granting a veto power to the separate governments. Libby, could you please read the legislation?
The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian Authority on issues in which it is indispensable, Hamas on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in governments, This legislation may be amended or repealed. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
Does anyone have, Professor Daphna Golan Agnon, do you have any questions regarding this veto power that we are going to be voting on?
No.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Don, you have any questions? Go ahead.
Using my own logic, it seems if there was something, an implementation of an economic zone or something that needed the cooperation and either the Israeli or Palestinian government constantly vetoed it, it would seem it would take the authority or the legitimacy of the common government away, and it would lose its ability to govern even as a third common government. So how do you respond to that? And how in practical matter would that work?
Okay, we have 5 million people voted. I was elected by 1.5 million votes, okay? If one of the governments veto reasonable legislation, I think it's the other way around. I think that they will lose legitimacy. I will do everything in my power to make sure nationally and internationally that they will lose legitimacy because they are the enemy of their own people. We are proposing reasonable legislation and they veto. So it's my job as the president to expose those people that veto reasonable legislation and to work internally to change either the Israeli or the Palestinian governments because they are the enemies of their own people. We're not going to lose legitimacy just because another government is unreasonable and doesn't want peace. We, in fact, are going to be having more legitimacy because we are the reasonable people. We want peace, and we demonstrated to the whole world that we are able to come up with a reasonable resolution for both sides.
So in essence, it's the political process or the will.
Exactly. Now I have a proposal. The gentleman that asked me a similar question, I forgot his name. Could you please identify yourself? I think it's Jeff.
Is that Jerome?
No, not Don, someone else. I believe his name was Jeff. He asked me when we presented the Constitution, I believe, or the assumptions.
What was the question again, Joseph?
The question was, what is the legitimacy of the common government if the Israeli and the Palestinian governments do not accept the legitimacy? And I gave the example of the Supreme Court, and it didn't register with him that well. Okay. He's not identifying himself, I guess he's. Don, since you asked similar questions, do you mind being the Israeli Prime Minister instead of Charles?
Sure.
Okay, because I think you would, by asking, so Charles, is that okay with you?
Yes, of course.
All right, thank you. All right, Sean, do you have a question?
No, Joseph. I need to step out a bit. I'll be right back. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay.
So I'll still have my position. I'm just gonna be back. I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay, no problem. Let's have a vote by the Parliament. Palestinian Parliament members, please vote on this legislation to grant the veto power. Palestinian Parliament members. Okay. Let's end the voting. Share the results. 100% of the Palestinian Parliament members voted in favor of the legislation. Let's have the Israeli Parliament members please vote regarding this legislation. We need 55% of the Israeli Parliament members to vote. Let's end the polling. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted. This legislation is not subject to a veto power because it does not violate the sovereignty of either the Israeli or the Palestinian governments, and therefore the separate governments do not have a veto power. Professor Daphna Golan Agnon, do you have any comments for us after you saw this legislation being passed?
Professor, you're muted. You need to unmute.
I'm saying that I'd better keep all my comments to the end because I think it's very interesting, the process itself.
All right. All right, let's go to the next. The first legislation. This legislation actually requires the Israeli and the Palestinian to not veto it in order for it to pass. So, Charles, do you mind reading this? Charles?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Teaching tolerance and understanding. Both educational systems to teach tolerance in their public schools. Devote a certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the Israelis and the Palestinians. Prioritizing teaching Arabic and Hebrew in public schools to achieve proficiency of both languages by Israeli and Palestinian students. Create a mutual task force to ensure the teaching of both languages. Educators to draft textbooks together and arrange for a regular exchange of teachers. Public media on both sides to provide fair and equal coverage daily for teaching tolerance. IPC to serve as a facilitator to ensure that both sides are fairly represented. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Okay, does anyone have any questions, including the professor? Do you have any questions regarding this legislation? Okay, hearing no questions.
Why 60 days?
I'm sorry?
I'm asking why 60 days? This is a serious, very serious legislation. So why do we need the answer within 60 days?
Because we want to put pressure on them to accept it. And we don't want them to delay it and ask for extensions upon extensions. This is a very reasonable legislation. It shouldn't take them more than 60 days to decide.
Okay.
Can we have the Palestinian parliament members please vote? Okay, publish the vote. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Okay. Publish the results. 100% of the Israeli parliament members. Wonderful. We have a very important legislation that could make a huge difference for peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I congratulate you for that. And I will work as the president as much as I can in order to convince the Israeli and the Palestinian and to embarrass them if necessary. So let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
I'm not going to veto the legislation, but I do want to communicate concerns about the fairness of the education and the process in implementing such a significant change to the public school.
Okay, we appreciate you not voting, vetoing it. We'll work with you.
Thank you.
We will work with you. We want peace. We want to engage with your government, and this is a huge momentous event that you are not vetoing this legislation, and I thank you so much for it. Let's,
And I want to respect the
Yay.
will of the parliament members. in doing
I'm
so.
sorry?
Respecting the will of the parliament members who voted in doing so.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. Let's go to the President of the Palestinian Authority. Mr. President, are you going to veto this legislation?
I'm not going to veto it. On a personal note, I think I was one of the contributors to this legislation. But I wanted to also assure my Israeli counterpart that this is not something that's going to replace the Israeli education system. It's a supplement to both the Israeli and the Palestinian education system, so that we can add an element of, for example, bilingual, have students who are bilingual who can interact with each other in the future. So we're not replacing your education system. We are adding a supplement to it, both of our education system. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. President. And I am very appreciative to you. I am the president of the whole area, and I respect your willingness to make peace and to help the people of Israel, Palestine live in peace and prosperity. And I appreciate the fact that you contributed to this legislation. Let's go to the Hamas leader. Mr. Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so I thank you so much. This is another momentous event in the history of Israel, Palestine, where the legitimate desires of the people of Israel and Palestine has been fulfilled, and it's a unique event in which both the Palestinian, the Hamas leader, and the Israeli leaders understand their obligation and accepted it, and you should all be commended. Thank you so much. Let's go to our professor. Professor Daphna Golan Agnon, do you have any comments regarding this momentous event in the history of humanity?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not sure that teaching tolerance as a legislation is a huge step forward. But I'm okay. I'm in this virtual reality. I'm all with you.
Okay, now I cannot overlook the fact that you were laughing. I'm sure that you're not laughing at us. You're just laughing at the way I was expressing myself. But the reason I did that is in order to demonstrate how it really would be in reality. These courteous comments do have effect in world politics, and I'm trying to show how it will have an effect, and complementing the various governments could go a long way.
Can I ask the professor a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Monsieur.
So Professor Golan, I understand about the toleration, but when you have things like people learning to speak each other's languages, opening the door of communication, you don't think that that could kind of like open doors to more mutual understanding? And I mean,
no, of course, I think it opens the door to. I'm laughing at the idea that this is like a new invention that we Palestinians and Israelis who've been active for all these years, we never thought about it. So this is like a big, that's what in reality, this is like a dream to think that in both education system, there'll be the other language, but the reality is so far away that it's nice to dream. I was laughing because it's so far away from where we are now. Tonight, right now, there's a big demonstrations in Tel Aviv for the biggest number of Palestinian Israelis who were killed because of the violence now. So, I mean, just to even think about joint Israeli and Palestinian teachers writing together the curriculum it's nice. It's a very hopeful dream.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to our next legislation, high-speed train connecting Israel and Palestine. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
Installation of a high-speed train connecting the entire state of Israel and the West Bank and Gaza to transport people and goods to the international airport and the joint economic zone. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, and we bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? Professor Golan, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote. Okay, publish the vote. 100%. We're getting more parliament members, which is great. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. I notice we're also getting more Israeli parliament, which is great too. Okay. And the voting, 80% of the Israeli parliament members voted yes in favor of this legislation. Let me go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
I think at this juncture, we will need to veto this legislation until there is more information about the security in the transportation system. There are too many concerns at this present time until there's more information.
Okay, and if we can work out with your military and your people a way to resolve these security issues, will you remove?
Then it would be considered to not veto if
Okay,
it can be worked out.
let's go to the PA. Mr. President, are you going to veto this legislation?
I think I'm going to veto because there's reservations, and for the opposite reasons or other reasons than what my Israeli counterpart. If you want, I can like briefly say what my reservations are.
Are your reservations opposite the?
I'm not necessarily concerned about security. I'm more concerned about that when you say the transportation of people, I'm a little concerned that we're, I want to make sure that this is not normalizing the settlements and facilitating the easy transport of Israelis into West Bank settlements and making it easier for them to live there and encouraging growth of those settlements. I'm also concerned about the international airport, since Palestinian citizens are not allowed to use the Israeli airport. I know recently they as of July 20th, Palestinians, citizens who have US citizenship are now allowed to use the Tel Aviv airport, but this is only about probably 100,000 people. So if you're giving access to the international airport and you're bringing in people, Israelis to move into the West Bank and making it easier for them, I have serious reservations about this.
Okay, what about Hamas leader, Mr. Hamas leader? Are you going to veto this legislation?
I'm not going to veto it, but I have doubts about it. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing with this high train connection.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, so you all agree we need to do more work in order to implement this kind of legislation.
Yes.
Correct.
All right. Okay, we will do that. So let's go to the next legislation. And that is a joint economic zone.
We don't want to hear Professor's opinion on that legislation.
Oh, yeah, I apologize. Yeah, Professor Golan, could you please tell us your opinion about this? About what you saw. You saw a process that started well, but
I'll wait for the end.
Okay. Joint Economic Zone. Charles, can you please read this legislation?
Joint Economic Zone, JEZ, between Israel and Gaza. Exclusive IPC management and control in cooperation with the existing governments. Common economy, education, industry, banking, agriculture, sewer treatment, desalination plants, solar farms, wind power, and green energy. International airport and seaport, equally accessible to Israelis and Palestinians. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? Professor, do you have any questions?
There's nothing in the legislation that says how it would be funded. It would be a question I would have.
Okay, yeah, there is another legislation about funding, but probably we will initially get international funding from organizations, from organizations that will benefit, and from governments all over the world. Any other questions? Hearing no questions, let's take a vote. Palestinian Parliament members, please vote. Do you support a joint economic zone? Okay. Please publish the vote. 93% of the Palestinian Parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli Parliament members. Okay. And the polling, 88% of the parliament members, Israeli parliament members, voted in favor of this legislation. Before we go to the Israeli and the Palestinian leaders, I just want to remind you, I am the president. We have 5 million people voted for us. That means that 5 million people want us to do the right thing for Israel, Palestine. And I am hoping that you will do the right thing. I will praise you if you do the right thing, and I will put pressure on you if you do not, and I will expose you if you do not, because you always said that Gaza needs to have a access to the world. And you always said that you want to avoid any violence between Gaza and Israel. And this is, in my opinion, an excellent way to remove any risk or minimize risk and give prosperity to the Palestinian and the Israeli people and go a long way towards peace. So please take that into consideration before you decide whether or not to veto this legislation. Mr. Prime Minister of Israel, are you going to veto this legislation?
I'm in support of the concepts of the economic zone, but again, there are details regarding particularly international airport and seaport and the movement of goods back and forth. So subject to the detail of the security arrangements, I will not veto the legislation.
Okay, let's go to the Palestinian Authority. Mr. President, are you?
I am not going to veto this. I support this.
Okay, let's go to the Hamas leader. Mr. Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I think this is a good idea because that will help the people in Gaza and it will reduce, have less tension between Israel and Gaza. I think that's a good idea. So no, I'm not going to vote the veto it.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much, all of you leaders. You're showing a vision of peace and and responsibility. And I praise you all for that. And
I just wanted to say that I think Sean is doing a good job, because Hamas, I actually think, has actually become less extreme than the Israeli government and are very open to economic cooperation.
okay, so let's do a post-simulation survey. It's going to be hard to beat 96%, but let's do a survey now after participating in the simulation. Do you support a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine? Please vote. And Professor, you can vote too. I don't know if you voted before, but, and I will ask you, how did you vote?
There is a hand up.
Okay, let's finish the vote and then we'll take care of the questions and all of that. Okay, so, okay, let's have more people vote. We have 38 participants. Please vote, all of you vote. Don't, we have 22 people who voted up to now. We need more voters. Please vote. Okay, I am going to end the polling and share the results. Okay, so 100%, 23 voted. Actually, less people voted now, but 100% voted. So I guess we have a lot of people that are on the fence, but 100% voted in favor of the common government, which is very encouraging. This is one of the smoothest. So before we go to closing remark, let's stop sharing and let's go to Professor Daphna Golan Agnon and ask her to make her comments.
Actually, if you don't mind, in the presentation that you sent me, the very last slide was your educational program, which I wanted to start my comments on that. But
you want me to go back to that?
If you may.
Sure. So that's the first slide that we have today.
Number 76, the very last one.
Because I moved them since I sent you.
Okay.
I think she meant the one about the toleration.
Never mind. I'll do it without. Let's forget the sharing so that we can see everybody.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
I want to talk about.
You went past it, Joseph. It was 2 before where you are now.
Okay.
Let me may I have 3 minutes?
Sure. You're our guest.
Okay. First of all, I want to say that I feel very grateful and moved to see so many people who are engaged and think about the future of Israelis and Palestinians and care about us and want to make peace. And generally speaking, this idea that we all live together in one state, if you call it confederation but together in equal rights and peace and justice, this is an idea that of course I share, and I see that from your polls, you all share. So first of all, I want to tell you that in these quite difficult times that we are in, it's heartwarming. Saying that, I want to say 2 things about, first about gender. Let's start with gender. And then we'll talk about what is we and you. So I'm not sure you've noticed that you had here a whole simulation of men talking, which seemed normal to you, that the prime minister is a man, even though you said that there's a Palestinian woman who was elected, but here you were all men. And I'm saying it because I want to talk about what's the purpose of this virtual reality that you're creating. And is this virtual reality is a reality that is including women really seriously, not only in saying, like one should say now, there is a woman, but in really having women part of the thinking, of the creation, of the process. And saying that, one of the only women voices I heard tonight was a very good question that was somehow dismissed. And the question was, did you do a poll? And I think it's a very good question. And I want to talk a little bit more about this. And my question is, not only if you did a poll to see if this is, but if you asked us, Israelis and Palestinians here, what do we think is doable? And when I say, if you ask us, I'm not saying what you did is a very male, excuse my language, thing to do. You have it all set out with all the numbers and all the legislation and what my role as the native, as the one from the Middle East, is to maybe correct a little or comment or ask a little question. I'm saying, why? Why is it so closed? Why do you already have all? You think we never thought that we should teach about tolerance? I mean, we've been active for so many years. We even had, for a short time, a left government when Yossi Sarid was the Minister of Education. And he said, he was trying all kind of programs and saying, all of the education minister will be about peace, tolerance, and human rights. Of course, he was not even 1 year in office. But what I'm saying is that make it into a dialogue and not into you have it all set and we only have to comment. But let's see, what I wanted to show is you were talking about in the slides that I show about education. I think it's very important. And I want to say that inside Israel, the first and many times the only place where Israelis and Palestinians meet is on campus. Because there are no separate campuses for Palestinians and Israelis. There are no Palestinian universities inside the Green Line, inside Israel. Right now, this is the only place where young Israelis and Palestinians meet and sit together and have some kind of relationship for 3 or 4 years. This is a very important area for work. And I do believe that education is very important. But I think we should have a dialogue about it and not only, you were saying IPC will facilitate. We've been trying this to facilitate meetings for so many years. There's the TBI, as you all know, so there is hardly any cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians. Your idea is, I think, fantastic, but I'm afraid the reality is very, very, very far from this beautiful dream.
Okay, so I asked you about in the simulations, I asked you, what do you see not a possibility? And you did not mention anything. So now you're saying that this dream.
No, the whole thing is not, I mean, you like asking me if, I don't know, if the people on Mars, and you're saying, okay, just go with me. Let's imagine that there are people living on the moon and we're going to visit them. And that's what's happening. This is like what we had now.
Yeah. Are you
reality that it was fun, but if you really
are you comparing an election online, an election, to meeting people on Mars? Are you saying
right now? I think it's it's a good
So,
comparison.
so what?
I'm not saying, first of all, I think it would be, I think it would be wonderful, but I'm asking the question is, how do you bring this beautiful idea from over there to the reality that we live in now?
You just create the election online. And we went
But
through.
that's what I'm telling you. What I'm asking you two questions. One is about the gender. Where are the women in this process? And the secondly is, where are we, Israelis and Palestinians? Where are we in this process? You're going to have the elections online, and what about us?
You'll vote.
We're just going to
You'll
comment.
vote and you'll run.
We'll just vote on your election. That's what you're proposing.
Yes, yes. The elections will take place. The voting mechanism will be online. Look, you have to accept some responsibility for the last 75 years of imposing violence on Israel, Palestine, and in many areas of the world. And now you're saying, well, we have exclusivity on Israel, Palestine. And
did you hear me say anything about exclusivity? I'm just asking you what
I am saying
we are going to vote on the elections that you're going to write.
Yes.
Makes sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Does it not
What
make
about
sense?
the women? Where
Women
the
will
women?
be able to, women will be able to vote. Women will be able to run. You bring the gender issue, it's not really relevant here. You just brought the gender issue, but it's not relevant at all to our discussion. We are not preventing women from running. The fact that we have more men on this simulation doesn't really have anything to do with actually voting in Israel, Palestine. The gender issue is totally irrelevant to actually having the common government. All right, so let's have questions. We have questions for you. Let's start with Nasir, then we'll go to Charles, then to Libby, and then to
Yeah, the question I have for Professor is that I think you're making two premises here that might not be. The first, that the Confederation, the IPC Confederation, is basically an outside group, people in the United States, like people. There are people participating here who are Israelis. Maybe they live in Israel. They're Palestinians. They may live in Palestine, and they may also be people who are like me, who's living abroad with a home and family living in Palestine. So I think we are not necessarily like an outside group looking at it from the outside, saying this is what you Israelis and Palestinians need to do. Secondly, when you say that there's currently right now existing groups that they only meet on the university, you're limiting it to the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, which are about 14% of the worldwide Palestinians. You don't see West Bank and Gaza students going to Israeli universities, meeting in Tel Aviv and things like that. So this sort of platform kind of brings together these elements. And I would say it's the opposite. The problem is the opposite, is that we're focusing too much on the 14 million Jews and Palestinians that live from the river to the sea, while you have another 7 million, 8 million that live outside of Palestine. So it's kind of the opposite of what so I think those premises need to be rethought.
No, I think you're right. You have a lot of work to do anywhere in the world and here. I'm just saying it's a little too close and too far from our reality. And I think that to say in the year 2023, the gender is irrelevant is something I cannot even comment on. I'm sorry.
I'm not saying that the gender is irrelevant. I'm saying bringing the issue of the gender is irrelevant to what we are proposing. We are not precluding.
What you're proposing doesn't include me.
Why does it not include you?
I'll tell you a story, okay? I don't know. It's like, so because you have a box that you're telling me you can shape it a little bit here, you can change it, but this is the box. This is what we have. These are the legislation. This is how
so change what needs to be changed in the box. What needs to be changed?
I don't want this box at all. I want us to
Okay.
create a process.
What's
that
wrong
is-
with it? What's,
and
okay,
the
so,
process is also about equality, not only the product. The whole
we had
process.
75 years for a process.
Oh, we failed. You're right.
Okay, so you can say, well, we want to
No,
have.
I'm all appreciative. I'm just
Okay,
trying.
so what's wrong with the box that we created? What's
The box, the box is a beautiful dream. How do you make it into reality? It's so far from our reality.
Okay, I told you $100 million will make it a reality. This is one day of war between Israel and is
This
$100
is
million.
really to reduce us, it's all to $100 million, really. Come on. You think the resistance of
Come
people,
on is not a response.
who's going to participate? Who's going to vote? Look at the simulation. Take the simulation and make it. I'm a sociologist, actually, trained as an anthropologist. It was fascinating. Take the simulation and make it, see it as a metaphor to what is going to happen. You had 100% for, okay? So who is
Yeah.
going to vote in your elections? Those who are.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you.
For. Let me
Joseph.
finish the sentence.
Joseph,
If we have the actual election and if we have total awareness of it in Israel, Palestine, in your opinion, as an Israeli professor, what is the percentage of Palestinians and Israelis who will vote if we have 100% awareness of the election? Please tell me.
1%, maybe.
1%.
Joseph,
Maybe.
I
Maybe
think you should move on
maybe
to the many
1%,
people
and that
who
will be
are
this
waiting to
1%
ask a
who are
question.
here. This is exactly your simulation is simulating the reality.
What is the basis? What is the basis?
No, excuse me. If you want me to say a sentence, let me finish one
Okay,
sentence.
I apologize.
No, I'm sorry. If you don't like what I'm saying, I don't.
No, okay. All right.
You can learn also, okay? This simulation is simulating the reality in many ways. And the reality is that you have here a group that is almost 100% agree with you, which is wonderful. We have to work with our activists. We have to have a group of people who trust us and work with us. We have to have a dream. I salute you, really. It's beautiful. But to make this into the reality of the Israeli-Palestinian peace, there is a way. There is a way. So I also think that we should think about how do you make this reality that is so clear to you that you don't think you need any women's opinion. You only need some
That's
questions.
not a fair comment. That's not a fair.
If everything is so clear, I'm saying
That's really not a fair comment, what you just said. I didn't say I don't need women's opinion.
I know you didn't
Joseph,
say. I know you didn't
Joseph.
say. But
All right, let's
also
go
that
to Charles.
Okay.
Charles,
You're muted.
unmute.
Israel had his hand up for quite a while. I don't know whether he still wants to ask a question. I'm going to go ahead, but maybe Israel, if you still want to ask a question, put your hand back up. I think you identified something very important, Professor Golan, and that is, well, we've done this presentation on various campuses, and whenever we have done that, it's been received very positively. And I think, well, obviously, for this to, what we're offering is a framework, and from our perspective, that's what's lacking as a tool for people to use to be able to figure out how to function their way out of this present impasse. And I think, presentations on the campuses that you speak of would be a very important contribution, because nothing can happen without that awareness, of the possibility that there is a tool available. And then if people want to take the tool and decide they need to change it in this way or that, that's another conversation. But I think the important thing is, it needs to be taken up by the people who are on the ground. in Israel and Palestine?
I think that you're very much right about the importance of universities. I actually didn't develop my thought about it. I recently published a book about the Hebrew University, which is based in East Jerusalem. So the Hebrew University is the best university in Israel, the oldest university in Israel. I teach at the best law school in Israel, and the students tell me they never talk to each other, Israelis and Palestinians. So you can have in one class Israelis and Palestinians. I am talking only about Israel. It's been a long time since we can really have communication in the West Bank, but inside Israel, citizens of Israel, they don't talk to each other. They know nothing about each other. They are desperate. They think that there is no future. And by the way, I think one of the worst things I'm writing about is that they think that they're not allowed to talk about the occupation and that they're not allowed to talk about politics. And there is this fear of talking about politics. And when I say the word occupation, they say, you're not allowed to say it. This is a political word. So I'm actually saying that universities are a very important platform for your kind of thought. If you open it for a dialogue, I think it's very important. And I think also you correctly identify the campuses as a place where young people can still change their mind, can still hope, can still have optimism. And this dialogue is very, very important for them.
And since they have a hard time talking to each other about these issues on campus, I mean, are you identifying that there has to be some kind of, in the ways of a presentation, a bridge, so to speak, between their current places where they're kind of stuck in their identities to be able to even contemplate something like the IPC? There has to be this this offering of a freedom to be able to discuss those things.
Well, you know, I've been in this peace business and dialogue business since I was very, very young, for many, many years. And I can tell you that not only from my experience, but also in the last 20 years, I've written books and researched this whole meeting between Israelis and Palestinians. And from my experience, it doesn't work. It only works when you do something. When you only talk, the dialogue is useless. Because one of the problems in your presentation, if you allow me, is this idea that there is symmetry between Israelis and Palestinians. There's no symmetry. There is a big asymmetry between Israelis and Palestinians. To create two governments that are seemingly equal, of course we don't have it. And we also don't have it on campuses because the Palestinians are minority on campuses. So they feel that they are underrepresented. When they have a meeting with Israelis, they feel that they have to teach the Israelis what's happening to them, how they're stopped at the airport, how they're searched. My cousin is is arrested. I mean, and they say, we don't want to feel again and again the trauma to teach you, because my book is really about how most Israelis don't know that there is an occupation. Don't know. They say this is ours, this is not occupied, or they never heard the word occupation, or as one of the soldiers told me, what do you mean occupation? I'm going to the army, I'm serving my country, this is no occupation. Or as a student told me, I told her, you live in the occupied territories. She said, what do you mean the occupied territories? She's living in the Jordan Valley. And she didn't know when she's 25 that she is living in the occupied territories. So there's a lot of work to do. And why I'm saying it, because we need your help. Because there's no education. Because the students can be physicians, they can finish law school, never in their life heard about the Nakba, never. never heard about the occupation. So our situation is very bad. We need a lot of help. We need a lot of programs about tolerance and teaching in Arabic and Hebrew. You're right. But what you're suggesting is a little far from our reality, I think.
I see that.
All
Joseph,
right,
are
let's
you
go
here?
to Libby.
Can I just add a comment just from
Okay, yeah,
previous
you
one?
raise your hand first. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a
Israel,
comment.
yes.
There were two resolutions, one about the train and one about the common area. May I suggest that the wording be changed to begin the planning for?
I'm sorry?
I would like to suggest that for the next simulation, you change those resolution by adding the words begin the planning of.
Begin the
The
planning
I-train
of.
train to build the I-train train is a 10 years project. You don't have to spend all the money today or get everything today. Just start the planning. That's all my comments. Thank you.
I see. Okay. Libby?
Daphne, I don't know if you know, your name is familiar to me, but my husband and I started a Jewish-Palestinian living room dialogue more than 30 years ago here in California. And through that dialogue process, and you just said you have to do action to make it have meaning. And yesterday, our ongoing dialogue group met again after more than 30 years. And we talked about this exact thing, you know, where do we as American Jews and Palestinians fit into the process? And we had a long conversation in our dialogue group just yesterday, after more than 30 years, talking about our role as Americans and how much voice we have in participating, support, inspiration, help to our friends and family who live in Israel and Palestine. And I know one of the things that we shared that came up in our group was the power of dialogue itself in our group, how much we learned about the other over the years by sharing our stories, men and women equally. The women have to have a voice at the table. And I bring it up because I think what you suggest is really important, and it's not the dialogue is the beginning part where you hear the other story. And it was through our dialogue group that the Jews learned about the Nakba. It was through the dialogue that the Israelis learned about the Holocaust. It was through our dialogue that these powerful stories were exchanged, and it changed our hearts and our minds about the other. And I think if that process isn't continued in some fashion in the Middle East, between the Palestinians and Jews, where they can work together and share their stories and then take action because they care about each other mutually, it's not going to happen. And I've been participating in Joseph's Confederation for a couple of years now because I feel like it's one place where there's a group of people from representing different backgrounds and countries, and it feels more global to me. But I do feel like that getting to know why each of us is here somehow is kind of missing. And because there's a lot of feelings behind everything. And I don't know, I don't really have a question. I just feel like a lot of what you said really resonated with me. And I wanted you to know that there's a group of people that have been working on this for a long time. And we're with you.
Thank you. Heartwarming.
Okay, let's go to Shinria.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much. So my question is about the joint economic zone legislation piece that we talked about. And I'm wondering if that concept implies that Palestine and Israel must share economic goals or economic aspirations. I would want to live in a world where Palestine and Israel can create their own economic aspirations and compete in the global marketplace. So I'm wondering if the joint economic zone implies that these two regions must share economic goals, or does it imply that it's ensuring equal access to economic opportunity so that both regions can fairly be afforded opportunities to participate in the global marketplace? And I guess my question is, what's really the goal? Is it to create shared economic resources and goals, or equal access to economic resources? Thank you.
I would say equal access to economic resources and to economic opportunity. It would be under the control of the common government. The IPC, the common government of Israel-Palestine is the government of the whole area, Israel-Palestine. So it would benefit the people of Israel-Palestine as a whole.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying. And just my last comment is I just wanted to show support for what Dr. Golan was saying. I love the teaching of tolerance, and I think education is such an important part of this, but I'm hoping that part of that can include some curriculum about a shared history and alignment on what has happened in the past, what is a fact, what is real. And I think until that alignment happens, that some of that tolerance education will fall on deaf ears. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to, are you done, or you have more questions?
Oh, no, I'm done. I'll put my hand down. Thank you.
Okay. Don Raphael.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the professor and deep admiration for your work in B'Tselem. From a vantage point of the United States, I think it's a heroic organization. I want to thank you for the work that you do. The second comment, and then a question, is it is mind-boggling to me as an American Jew, as an American, to hear in a small geographical area like Israel and Palestine that Israelis cannot be aware that there is an occupation 30 miles away or even closer. It is somewhat mind-boggling from a US perspective. But my question for you, Professor, is I'm curious what your view is of a solution, granted, however far it may feel. I come from a peace activist. I've been on the board of Combatants for Peace, American Friends Combatants for Peace, a great organization of Israeli and Palestinian activists doing work on the front line. I come from a two-state solution view, but it seems to be in the rear view mirror. And I do admire Joseph's work on the Confederation concept. In fact, I'm noting that J Street now has a conference on September 11th about the Confederation model. And I would also add that the IPC has invited other Confederation models to come onto these simulations. So it's not like this is like the only solution. We're looking for solutions. But I'm curious what your view is, however far away it may seem, what the pathway is, because it seems to me there should always be hope and a pathway to the future. Thank you.
I agree with you. And of course, I've been active since the 80s. And for many years, I thought the two-state solution is the solution. In 1996, we organized a huge festival, actually, in Jerusalem under the title Sharing Jerusalem, Two Capitals, Two States. That was 96. Sinead O'Connor, who just died, I was invited to open the festival, and our Minister of Police, Itamar Gvir, threatened to kill her, and that's why she didn't come. So at that time, in 96, it was clear to me that we're going to separate for two states. I think it's impossible now, and I believe in one state. But even though I believe at the end there's going to be one state, I think because internationally and legally, the world is going to two states. My thought is that it doesn't matter which way it's going to take. We'll start with two states, and then will be one state. If it will be a confederation, I think these are almost details on the way to eventually a one state. But it would be interesting to see how the international community will react, because the international community, for the legal reason that the occupied territories are under the Geneva Convention, international humanitarian law, and Israel is a so-called democratic state, has different legal system. It's like working towards two states, but I believe eventually it will be one state.
And how would the dismantling of the Israeli and the Palestinian governments take place?
I don't know. Truth is, I don't know. I really have no idea. I think that I used to think that I'm clever, but now with everything that's happening in Israel, I feel that we really failed. I mean, in the beginning, when we started B'Tselem, we were young. We thought if only Israelis would know what is happening in the occupied territories, the occupation will end. So we'll give them information so that they would know. And once they would know, they would all be in the streets and they will be demonstrating and the occupation will end. So now all the Israelis know. They all know. And the occupation is still happening. So my short, I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And I don't even know if it's going to happen. But I hope one day.
All right, let's go to Shlomo, and then Sean, and then Nasir.
Yeah, first I want to thank you again. 1 second, let me put this on. Yeah, so thank you very, very much for coming. I have several questions, but I agree with you that this is a dream, but because we don't know what will happen, this is a beginning of maybe something, and at least we have a conversation, and at least we have a dream, because without the dream, we don't have anything. So I am a little puzzled with you, talk about the gender problem. There is nobody prevent any women to come in the country. I don't know why. I am participating in another forum, kind of political forum by George Galloway and mostly men. And he said, yeah, female priority, just call, talk to me. And they don't, and only few do. So I don't know, my wife is not interested in it, and I do. So I don't think the fact that we are mostly men, I'm not sure this is has to do with any discrimination. So I'm kind of curious why you say so even. The other thing, I agree with you about the total asymmetry. It's ridiculous even to call it a conflict. It is a genocide by one people of another people. That's what it is. And they want the land, and that's about it. And there is no solution because Israel has too much power, and there is nobody in the world to stop it. It acts like a branch of the United States. The United States is interested in Israel mostly as mercenaries, in my view, that maybe will help them with invading or fighting Iran as a proxy war. I don't know. But the fact is that we don't too much power here, and they do what they want. And I must admit that seeing Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, it's pretty shocking. This is another question: what the Jews will decide to do over the world. The only solution is if the Jews all over the diaspora will see what's going on, will understand. You want to educate Israel, to show them what happened. They don't want to show. They don't want to see. I'm sorry. They don't want to see anything. They definitely don't. And if you try, you are somehow a traitor. You're somehow doing the wrong thing. Interestingly, yeah, that's what Noam Chomsky called manufacturing consensus, manufacturing consent. So yeah, so those are my questions, and I think this dream could in a very dark kind of future. My prediction is that this conflict or this situation will be solved either by just complete expulsion of the Palestinians, or by a total war in which Israel will lose, and there will be just bombs all over and missiles shooting, and there will be just a few people left, and those people will have to live together and to make a government which will be something like what we offer here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to answer about the gender issue. You're saying, you're quoting your friend saying, just come. But this is exactly the problem, just come. And the whole thought that you will build the program and we will come and join you is a wrong way to think about it. I'll give you another example. First of all, nobody's talking about discrimination. No, I don't think anybody is thinking that men are meeting and saying we don't want women. Of course not. We are more sophisticated than that. But if you look, for example, at the Knesset, how do you explain the small number of women at the Knesset? I'm sure that nobody was saying, except for the ultra-religious parties that don't have women, and nobody's saying at the Likud we don't want women. But it so happens. So it's for you men to start thinking, why is it that we're not part of it? And maybe you should, I think that's your role. I want to give you another example. There are huge demonstrations now, as I'm sure you've all seen on the television, right? The Israelis demonstrate every Saturday. And Israelis are saying to Palestinian citizens of Israel, why don't you join us at the demonstrations? Why don't you come, as you say, just come. And they say, no, we don't want to join you. This is you demonstrating to save your democracy, your rights, not our rights. We're not going to demonstrate with thousands of Israeli flags at the demonstrations. So this is like a metaphor or another example to how discrimination doesn't happen on purpose, but maybe it's time to do some work about it. Take it seriously. Because it's not only about numbers. This whole equality, if we take equality seriously, there are many ways to understand equality. And if you think about feminist thought, in the first generation, women say, we should be like men. If men can vote, we can vote. If they can work, we can work. If they can be elected, we can be elected. So we're going to be like men. And they were counting. And we still have to count, like I'm counting now how many women are here. But second generation women say, it's not only about the numbers. And also, we don't want to be like you. We're different. And actually, when you were saying, I was thinking all the time about Carol Gilligan, who was doing her PhD at Harvard in psychology, and seeing how the questions that are asked are meant for men. And they were studying adolescents, and they were only studying boys, as if boys and girls are the same. Now, we were all adolescents one day, and we know that when you're a teenager, girls and boys are not exactly the same. So this idea that maybe we have different interests in the future state. Maybe we think constitutions can be different. Maybe, I don't know. I was asking about, harassment, sexual harassment laws. Maybe we share a lot together in this sense. So I think one should think seriously about equality and take gender equality very seriously. And maybe I'll end and say that in the third and fourth generation of feminism, the different ideas of equality that were developed. And I know, for example, in the US, there's a lot of talk about race and class, and saying, it's not only about gender, it's also about your position in society. Also internationally, in Israel, there's a lot of debate about what is equality within women. Do you, as a woman, a white woman, and in Israeli society have the same privilege as an Ethiopian woman. I mean, there are many issues about different voices, and I think they should be taken very seriously. If you really think about a confederation, we should be partnered too.
What could we do? What could we do right now for this forum to add more women? More voices. I talk to these things, but maybe Olivia can bring more friends. I don't just wonder. I mean, what can we do?
Can you add me to the list of people who want to speak, Joseph?
We have a lot, but it's okay. Since this is a.
Can you raise your hand?
Speaking about the subject, go ahead. Go ahead.
She's on a phone. She can't raise her hand.
Olivia, you are mute.
Yeah, sorry, are you inviting me to ask a question?
Yeah,
Joseph?
because it's,
well, I hope the
obviously you
people
want to
that
talk about.
Well, I've jumped the line. I hope the other people will forgive me.
Go ahead, jump the line.
Good evening. Well, thank you. Well, good evening, Professor Golan, and thank you very much for being with us. We greatly appreciate, and we all have immense admiration for B'Tselem, obviously. Right, let's stop dreaming for 5 minutes and talk about reality. Can I ask you about violence towards women in Palestine, in the West Bank and in Gaza? And we know that when men are humiliated and impoverished and unemployed, and as well as that, brutalized by an occupation, we imagine that they take it out on their womenfolk. Now, do these unfortunate women that are in a very difficult position, fighting the opposition and corruption from their own government and the patriarchal society of Palestinians, unfortunately, very difficult. What is their outlet? That is is it spoken about? I would guess not. What is their outlet? I mean, I'm talking about domestic violence. I'm talking about violence on the part of husbands or neighbors or colleagues or policemen or violence. And is there a follow-up? Are the men brought to justice? And are there refuges? I mean, even in the most advanced European countries, I live in Europe, there are refuges for women that are beaten up by their husbands. Where are these poor, and I mean poor economically as well as poor economically, where do these poor Palestinian women go? Do they feel shame? Do they feel say a fault? That's all. I appreciate what you say about gender, and I go along with you, absolutely. Absolutely, thank you. Thank you.
So there is a new book recently published this month by Rima Hamami, Laila Abu-Lugurt, and Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian about gender-based violence in Palestine, and also about Gaza particularly. Of course, the situation is bad, very bad. There are not enough shelters. But in Gaza, there are 2 shelters, one of the Hamas and one sort of outside of the Hamas system. The West Bank, there are shelters. But of course, this is a huge problem, very important problem, I think, to deal with. There are very strong feminist organizations in Palestine who are working on feminist legislation. We're trying to get to raise awareness. But of course, the situation is bad.
So, Professor,
thank you very much. Thank you. Thank
you. You think you can be part of our board of directors and also bring more women to help us?
Let me think about it.
Okay, you let us know whenever you decide. That would be great. Let's talk to, next one is Sean.
Hi, Professor Golan. You mentioned, actually, when Joseph mentioned early, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Joseph mentioned early about the 100% awareness, and you mentioned that we'll only get 1% from the awareness that you mentioned earlier. So can you clarify a little better on that? Because what do you mean about the 1%? That only 1% of the people will take it seriously and the others don't, because this awareness that people will see it that it's really nonsense? So, yeah, can you explain a little further about it?
No, I was saying that I find it wonderful that there is a group that work together and almost 100% share the same thoughts. And I share your views. But in the reality, if you do have these elections online, Joseph asked me what is the percentage that I think will vote. And so I think it's very low, because I think even I, who share your idea, I would not vote. So who is going to vote? I mean, sometimes when we believe, I know it's from, my many years of activism, all your friends are activists, your family is activist, like you feel that you are the majority. Then you go to the vote and you see that, even you're a very small minority. And I'm afraid to tell you that I think that's why the question of a poll is a good question, to see how many people you think might vote. I think it's a very good question. I believe very few, because when you have an alternative process, which is what you're building, an alternative process, an alternative government, an alternative reality, you want people to believe that it has any sort of authority or responsibility or possibility to act, right? But if at the end, all the people who are going to vote for you are not going to represent the different trends and political views and class, but to be very much a small group of people who think the same way, who don't represent the whole society. No?
Oh, right. So basically, if you talk to them about it or you mention it about it, they think you're speaking a foreign language, that they'll just shake you off and tell you, we don't need you, pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good. Thanks, Joseph.
All right, sure. Let's go to Samir. Samir.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Professor Golan. I am a journalist and an archaeologist, and I thank you for all your works, because I have been involved in the cause almost all my life, and I think you did too. And what you told us today, that is really the sad reality of what's so-called Israel. It is, in a way, I mean, now, if you wanna talk to them about the IPC model and talk about elections and all of that, I don't think that is gonna work, because, I mean, if you have a population who's not aware of the occupation and the Nakba, and the majority of them are, how can you conduct an election where, I mean, the first thing you're supposed to recognize the other party? So, I mean, it is like, I mean, conducting democracy in a society, ignorant society. And in a way, I mean, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And I agree with her, because, or I mean, 1% maybe will, and that's not enough, I mean, to be successful. I mean, you need at least 50% to agree with your project, with your model, not 1% or not even 10%, not even 20%. So it is really sad and bad reality. I mean, I don't see that anything you propose to the Israeli population today is going to work, because, I mean, it is like they don't recognize you. They don't know what's occupation. They don't know what's Nakba. So how? I mean, you're talking to ignorant people. So if they are ignorant and they don't recognize you, then it's hopeless. Then no elections, no democracy, nothing. I mean, these people don't deserve anything. I mean, so it is hopeless. That's what I see it. hopeless society. I'm sorry. It is, I mean,
Yeah, it's very
hopeless.
difficult to hear, but yeah.
That's the reality. But I agree with you. I agree with you total. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Nasir?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. Professor Golan, I also want to thank you for your years of activism and work with Bet Salam. They've done, absolutely great things. The sad thing is that, excuse me for saying this to you, but when I hear you speak and when I hear some of your comments, it sounds to me like you're I have so much solidarity with you, because it's like, you're like, almost like you're so frustrated, and almost to the point where it's like, all this work we've done and the country's getting worse. Everything is just, it's not working. And it's because, the opposite side, the settler movement, the right-wing movement is just achieving so much and succeeding and winning the hearts and minds of the young people. If you look at most people who support peace and coexistence, they're usually older people. Younger people are much more inclined to the right wing. And this is something that I can see from your tone and your voice and what you're saying. It's almost like, hey, enough, all right. And and like, look at it from the Palestinian citizens of Israel, and you ask the question, like, why are they not participating in the pro-democracy or the anti-reform? I would say not pro-democracy, I'd say anti-reform demonstration. Why are they not participating in the university discussions more? It's because even when the Palestinian parties became more active in the government, it created a reaction from the right wing. It created more animosity toward them, where, now Palestinians can be, criminally charged if they have a Palestinian flag. I don't know if it's the law yet, but I know that they're working toward the flag itself is being criminalized. Palestinians are even now being told, if you participate in certain things, you're going to lose your citizenship and be deported. These things don't happen to Jews. Jews can go to the streets and demonstrate. They don't have to worry about being displaced or removed from the country. They don't have to worry. Like, there's an Israeli a journalist and PhD person. His name is Saraj Assi. He writes for Haaretz, and he's I think his PhD is from Tel Aviv University. He writes that he didn't even know what the Nakba. He's a Palestinian living in the 48 areas, and he didn't even know what a Nakba was until he was 20 years old, because this group has literally had to kind of stay out of the way. They lived under martial law until 1966. And they even face, look what's happening to the Arab citizens in the Negev. They're being removed from their homes. The Druze are losing territories in the north. So it's not necessarily to say that they don't want to participate, they won't. But when you ask a Palestinian, why are you not participating in these anti-reform? This is the same court that has never, and I repeat, never ruled against the illegal detaining of Palestinians in jails. This is the same court that ruled in favor of settler groups taking houses in Sheikh Jarrah, telling Palestinians that you don't own these houses or you don't have the right to these houses. So how do you expect Palestinians to participate in these demonstrations of the same court that has been the enemy and has ruled against them in almost all these rulings, that protects the army detaining someone for 3 to 6 months without charge, without representation? It doesn't make sense to do that. So I totally get your frustration, but at the same time, maybe these demonstrations, maybe this awareness that, hey, something's wrong, it has to be maybe that spark that says these demonstrations, these reforms are linked to the occupation, because the goal of these right-wing and people who are changing the reform, their goal is annexation and the expansion of the centerprise enterprise. They are using their powers to basically block any opposition in the future, to expand and to annex the territory and to continue and basically become an official apartheid state. So that spark can be the hope that, people like you and your work can overcome them.
I absolutely share with you this hope. I go to the demonstrations, I see these young people. I know that most of them don't see the connection to the occupation, but I think eventually it's a process. It's the first time that we have a movement of refusal, of soldiers who refuse. I've been involved in the refusing since the 80s, people who would not, and now we have something happening. So maybe it's the beginning, of a new process of young people who would who would refuse, who would say no. We don't want to serve the occupation. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is hope.
Let's go to John and then Shlomo.
Yeah, before I make a comment on the issue, Joseph, I'd like to quickly ask your question with regard to the invites you've made to various people. Those people who have refused to contact you or refused to come to join a meeting, I want to ask you, have you sent them a list of past speakers? Because that list is very impressive. And if they see that list, then they would say, well, I'd like to join that.
John, I'll send you a sample of my letter. It includes everyone that participated.
Okay, right. My comment is, you know, when it comes to the IPC and every other potential solution to this whole issue, I always focus on some, perhaps the most powerful aspect to the which sits in the background a bit, and that is the force and the influence, both soft and hard, that America has on Israel and everything else. So, you know, we could wait for centuries before Israel decides to participate in the IPC. But if we had America applying their influence to create an IPC, don't you think that we should perhaps focus on America's influence rather than Israel's influence?
Are you asking me?
Well, let me ask Professor Golan.
I think it's a wonderful idea. I think you're absolutely right. If it comes from American pressure, it has a hope. But if it comes directly, I think it would be very difficult. But I think, yes, I think there's a lot of work to do in the US. A lot of work to do in the US. You know, I think there's an opening now, because I think people start seeing what Netanyahu and his government are like. And I think maybe it's time to, you know, to push in the US these ideas.
Well, there is a difference between the US and the US government. The US government is the most hypocritical government when it comes to Israel-Palestine.
Right, but that's the only thing you have.
It is,
Right.
is a government that for itself support the Constitution, supports separation between church and state, opposes segregation, supports the idea of secular government. But when it comes to Israel-Palestine, it supplies free weapons to Israel. It supports the segregation between people based on religion. It is so it's not going to do any good. It's not going to propose this common government. We are not the only smart people that propose this. They have a different interest. Now, as far as the American people, yeah, that's a different story. They can support it, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd just like to say one more thing, that you know, when we talk about the conviction that perhaps Jews in Israel has in comparison with the Jews in America, if we agree that, you know, that America does have the power, the American Jewish Electoral Institute, as you may well know, a couple of years ago ran a survey, and they found that 25% of all American Jews believe that Israel is an apartheid state, and that figure increases to 38% for those Jews aged under 40. So I think the movement towards justice, a better chance in America, given the influence and the conviction that many Jews do have on the sympathy that they do have for the Palestinians.
All right, I'm going to do some concluding remarks, and then you can go on, because I have to do the concluding remarks, and I have to move. So let me just do the concluding remarks, and then we'll move on to then you guys can stay because it's been more than 2 hours and it's. Sorry. Okay, here. I would like to briefly respond to the issue of that was presented by the professor regarding a poll. No government in the world has created a poll before it created the actual election. Saying that we need to have a poll, that's basically an obstacle. It's a poison pill to destroy the idea. When you do anything in life, you do it. You don't do a poll whether that is a good idea, because the public doesn't really understand what it is. If we actually have the election, then people will understand that who are they voting for in their district and the president. And there's no need for a poll. The US government never conducted a poll before it had the election. The Israeli government never conducted a poll. I see the idea of a poll is as a poison pill to destroy the common government. It's not to create the common government. It's just a way to get out of it. A common government will be the only legitimate government. The Israeli government is not a legitimate government in Israel, Palestine. The Palestinian government is not the legitimate government. So this will be the only legitimate government, and therefore the Israeli and the Palestinian governments will have to pay attention to the only legitimate government. Online election is feasible. The country of Estonia has 9.5 million people. It conducts election online. $100 million could make this election a reality. And I don't think that, with all due respect to the professor, the idea that this thing comes from the outside is a basic no-no. Israel and Palestine had 75 years of not making peace. And maybe it is time to have people from the outside involved in creating the platform. That's all. The Palestinians and the Israeli people will still vote. I was surprised to hear that the professor said that she will not vote, even though throughout the simulation, she agreed with everything that was going on. So I'm not sure why you would not vote. So I'll give you an opportunity to respond, and then I'm going to close, but you can remain and talking to.
So I just want to thank you. It was fascinating. I dream with you. My heart is with you. I think that, as I told you, I think that it's very good to know that people care. And maybe one day the dream will come true.
Okay, so are you going to vote if we have the election?
It's like, I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. And we're waiting for you to join us and bring more women, because we all agree with you.
And thank you for the, and thank you for the good work.
Thank you so much. And you guys.
All right.
All right.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.